What scares me a little bit about a newer generation of journalists is maybe sometimes like not necessarily being objective, because I guess like I'm an old school kind of person, and I do feel like there really is still a place for just facts. There are still facts out there. And so I guess my advice for people who are coming up would be.
And we're recording once again. Good afternoon, Ken. How are you?
Good afternoon, Fenton. The beard's coming in very lovely, by the way.
Thank you. Keeping it moisturized. Well,
you have to. You got to put the moisturizing beard stuff on. Yeah,
it's a thing. It's an expensive hobby. That being said, welcome to Products of Circumstance, the podcast with Ken Skeen and myself, Fenton Joseph. We discuss mental health and mindset matters through the lens of Black men. This show is unscripted, clearly unfiltered, and mostly unedited. We choose our topics randomly, but today we do have a guest, and we're going to introduce her in just a moment. But first, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and most importantly, please share with someone who's on their personal development journey. And with that said, Ken, why don't you introduce our lovely guest?
All right. So our lovely guest for today is Miss Jill Wagner, who is and was a journalist and TV anchor on Channel 12 News. She's been on CBS. She was part of Cheddar News at one point.
Cheddar.
She also is a co-host on Mo News, which is very popular. A marathon runner, mommy of two, and also was inducted into the Jericho High School Hall of Fame, along with winning, 2 Emmys, I believe, 2 Emmys for her work with News 12.
Awesome.
But yes, we have the wonderful Jill Wagner joining us today to have a couple laughs and have a small talk.
The Jericho Hall of Fame is my proudest moment, Ken. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. I know it's pretty busy, and the youngest one is 12 months, along with your amazing schedule for the day that you have. You co-host a podcast, meanwhile trying to get everything in order at home, raising 2 children on top of the rest of the world, kind of just pushing you down as you fight through it. Well, it's really just a 12-year-old. Look, I have 4 kids at home. I understand. It's work.
4.
It's a lot of work.
My hat's off to you.
4. But it's fun. They're all a blessing, of course. So let's get right into it. So Jill, thank you again for coming on. I just tell the audience a little about yourself. What made you get into broadcasting, and how has that impacted your life?
Well, you covered kind of like the greatest hits there, just in terms of my resume, which I appreciated. I think I'd always wanted to be a journalist, even from, high school days and even earlier than that. I'd loved always writing. And I knew I wanted to do something in the communications field. I just didn't know exactly which direction I wanted to go in. And then when I was in college, when we were seniors in college, September 11th happened. And that kind of like changed everything in my life. And I got really interested in the Middle East. So I went to the University of Michigan for undergrad, and then I went to graduate school at Columbia, and I studied religion. And I really, if you go back, that's 2002, 2003. And at that time, we were at war in Afghanistan, and we were about to invade Iraq. And I was just really interested in that part of the world. So I eventually got a job at NBC News working on their foreign news desk. And at that point, I was like, send me over. I want to be a producer in the field, covering war zones. And my boss at the time was like, you have no experience at all. Like we're not sending you into a war zone. That would be crazy. And so I started at that point doing local news and getting experience. And I was behind the scenes first. And then I realized I loved writing and I wanted to be the person putting the stories together. And that's what I did. I moved to a small market in Lansing, Michigan, which was my first on-air job, and I absolutely loved it. I was out every single day meeting people, learning about this community that was different from where I grew up on Long Island, but people cared about the same stuff, right? Being safe, their kids, schools, taxes, things like that. And then I eventually came back to Long Island. I was a reporter at News 12, as you mentioned, then at CBS. And now I do this podcast. I work with my friend Moshe. We do a podcast for Mo News. It's called the Mo News Podcast. And I do a ton of other things. I actually just wrote a children's book that I'm trying to get published. Wow. So that's the gist of kind of how everything kind of fell into place. It's one of those things where you think you're going to do one thing and then all of a sudden something else happens and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. And so you go in that direction. And I've kind of just, I think, taken that approach with my career where I don't try to plan too far ahead because, you never know what you're going to like and what you're not going to like and what opportunities will present themselves.
Wow. That's really good. Like, that's a lot. You've really taken on a lot since graduating and deciding what the path you wanted to take with your career. A lot of it I didn't really know. I was looking at your profile. Again, Jill and I actually know each other from Jericho, going to middle school and high school together. And I was able to keep up with you when you were on Channel 12 News and CBS. But being in Michigan now, I know you said it's the same. People care about the same things, as in, your children, taxes, housing, whatever it may be. But was there like a culture shock leaving, I guess, the bubble of Long Island, let alone the bubble of Jericho, and going into a community where, was it more tight knit? Was it more eccentric? Was it?
So I had moved out to Lansing, Michigan when it was 2007, I think. So I had actually been living at the time in Manhattan. And if you think back, 2007, 2008 is when we had the Great Recession, when the housing bubble burst. And so I was still living in Manhattan where Wall Street was booming and people had a lot of money. And you didn't really feel like anything bad was about to happen in terms of the economy. And then I moved out to Lansing, Michigan, and I would drive down streets where there were foreclosure signs on every other house, maybe, and some blocks, maybe every house. And I was like, what is happening? I mean, it was a totally different perspective when they talk about, Wall Street versus Main Street. I think that's exactly what the experts are talking about when they say it. So that was the biggest difference that I saw immediately was the economic, what was happening just in terms of the economy in Lansing. It was almost like a year ahead of when Wall Street took that huge tumble with the Great Recession. But the people in general, besides for the fact that, there was differences, like there was a GM plant, a General Motors plant that had shut down. So I think the first thing that I noticed, besides for not having to live on top of everybody, and I had like the nicest apartment that I think I've ever had in Lansing, Michigan, because you could get so much more for your money, just not being in New York. But I think the first thing that I had noticed, the biggest difference was just the economy there.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a shock once you leave New York. I guess some New Yorkers really need to like go to Middle America or go to different states that just don't have the economy that we have, because we do bounce back first. So we do feel the effects last, but we also bounce back first. What do you got, Fenton?
I just think it's
intrigued.
Yeah, I'm really big on that. People getting outside of their comfort zone and going to places outside of their local communities. There's a lot of people in the Black community that never gets outside of their local community. And exposure, right? It has a lot to do with how you view the world. You have to, I'm a big proponent of like, if you can see it, then you can believe it and then you can achieve it, right? But you got to see it first, So in your case, seeing kind of the other side of things, how did you feel that helped you to shape your career path and also your personal development having that experience?
So I actually just wanted to, before I answer that, I wanted to go back to something that you just said, Fenton, because you were talking about, getting outside of your own community. And when you asked me originally how I decided to go into journalism and why I decided to go into journalism, I left out one of the key reasons as well. I went in college on what was called the March of the Living, where you go, students go to Auschwitz, which is the concentration camp in Poland. And I am Jewish. That's my background. And Ken, you might appreciate this. We grew up in a really Jewish community. And it sounds so absolutely naive, but I never even realized growing up how much of a minority Jewish people were, because everyone I knew, for the most part, with the exception of just a handful of kids, was Jewish. Like, we were at bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs every weekend. It's just, that was kind of how we grew up.
Yep.
And I went to college, and I went to the University of Michigan, but I joined a Jewish sorority. So most of my friends were still Jewish. I was like still in that Jewish bubble. And then when I went to Auschwitz, my eyes were opened. It totally changed everything for me. Not only just seeing like that there was this organized system to kill Jewish people, in which 6 million were actually killed. But then when I met, we had these tour guides who were locals. So I met this, it was a Polish tour guide who was, coming with us around. And he made this comment to us on one of our last days, because he was with our group for, 3 or 4 days when we were in the country. And he was like, it's so nice to meet you guys. And like, you're like normal, you're like real people kind of. And he was shocked that we were, like I said to him, actually, what did you think? Like, did you think we had horns or something? What were you actually expecting? And he didn't really answer the question, but it was a really defining moment in my life where I realized just this enormous amount of prejudice that existed. And that was another reason that it kind of got me into the career that I am in. But it was just really eye-opening, because again, I had been in such a bubble for a long part of my life. And then I was just like, wow, I never kind of felt that before.
That's so good.
Yeah.
That's right. I grew up, just for context, I grew up in Westbury, which is right next door to Jericho. I grew up very close to Westbury High School. So like basically across the street from the high school. And I'd say my parents were middle class, but like, just like sort of upper middle class, right? Like they called us the Huxtables at school. Like they made fun of us. They're like, oh, you guys are the Huxtables. Like, you guys live in like the nice part of town, whatever. And I grew up in a basically all Caucasian neighborhood. My little brother went to Jericho High School, and all his friends were Jewish. And, like even like within that couple miles, radius, like there was a very specific, type of community that was there, and my parents, they did a great job, I think, of exposing us to different things. We took family trips and things like that. And like, we have all different kinds of friends from like all different backgrounds growing up. And I just felt that it was, even that being said, I still had to go outside of Long Island and New York City and everything, like as I got older and start to be like, okay, the world is even way bigger than that. Yeah. Right. Because I'm like, oh, like, I got white friends, I got Indian friends, I got all different types of friends, which was helpful, but there's so much more. So even for people like us, who grew up in a place where, within a couple miles, you like I said, we were like middle class, upper middle class. Like, so I always say that socioeconomic, factors, like, depending on where you are in that strata, usually tends to determine more who you kind of hang out with than, I think, even more so race, right? Like it's really about, do people like you do things like this? Like our kid went to a Montessori school, so it's like, because we make a certain amount of money, you can afford to put your kid in private school. And so that means you hang out with certain kinds of people. Anyway, I promise I'm going to put a bow tie on this. Going back to my question, you went to Auschwitz, and is that how you pronounce it? Auschwitz?
Auschwitz. Yeah.
Auschwitz. I want to be correct. You went to Auschwitz, you went to Lansing. What was kind of like, like, I understand that you like, oh, like there's prejudice out there and things like that. But like, what was the what was your goal? How was that? What was your goal after you went to Auschwitz, after you went to Lansing, and you see these things and you're like, okay, what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do about the world now that I've been more informed? And how do I, be the change that I want to see?
It's a really great question. When I went to Auschwitz, not only do you go, but you have to do a lot of prep work. So they give you a lot of reading material and you learn how the Holocaust was allowed to happen, like how it didn't just happen one day. It was over a course of many, many years where the Jewish community in Germany, to begin with, was forced to live in ghettos and all of their businesses were taken away. And it gradually happened, even the language that was the way that they spoke about the Jewish community and the terminology that they used, everything was really planned. Like they called it, extermination. They would never say death or killing. The language was so specific. And what I really learned, not only on the March of the Living and visiting Auschwitz, but in all of the work that I had done beforehand and afterward, studying and taking classes about the Holocaust, was that policies policies have consequences, and elections have consequences, and things can just creep up on you. And so you've got to be educated. And I think that was my takeaway was, we have to start paying attention to what's going on. And so let me at least try to be the medium, explaining policies in a conversational way that people could understand, trying to make sense of candidates and what they stand for. So I've covered politics a lot. I was a political reporter actually in Lansing and also on News 12. And I think that a lot of people only pay attention to maybe the presidential races or the national political races. But I think equally important, and if not more important, is actually local elections as well, because it's local politicians and local lawmakers that are actually making decisions that really might affect you on a day-to-day basis. So I think that was the motivating force. It was this real understanding after going to Auschwitz and seeing just the consequences of bad decisions and bad people in office, understanding that there's real life implications for being uninformed and making certain decisions.
Oh, that's so good. No, it's so good.
No, it is.
Go ahead.
Wait.
Go ahead.
All right. So you have 2 awards sitting right behind you. Displayed very lovely, by the way. No, those 2.
It's fine. Yeah, I see.
But before we started, before we got on, we were speaking about that. So after you took that journey and you learned more about the history of the Jews and the Holocaust, you were mentioning that you made a documentary. You wrote a documentary and made a documentary about what you've seen, what you had learned. Can you explain to the audience in short what you were able to, I guess, what kind of knowledge you were able to put out that people really don't understand about? Because I remember we went to a Jewish high school and we did learn about the Holocaust in some kind of depth, but I don't feel, they want to hide things from children because you don't want to mess them up too bad. So we didn't learn enough about it. And there are still people out there that say that it never happened, which I don't understand that. It is what it is. We don't get too political on here. But there are people out there really saying that the Holocaust never happened. But from you visiting and learning what you've learned to win those 2 awards, can you explain to the audience a little bit about the documentary?
Sure. So the whole idea actually, so I went, it was such a full circle moment in my life because I had this really life-changing experience when I was in college where I went on the March of the Living, which was what sparked this whole trajectory of me becoming a journalist. And then about 10 years later, when I was a reporter at News 12, I had learned that it was the 25th anniversary of the March of the Living. And that for the first time, so what the March of the Living is, it's a march from Auschwitz, which is the work camp, to Birkenau, which is the death camp. So basically in Birkenau, you just go straight to a gas chamber pretty much, and you're I mean, it's horrible, but that's actually what happened. In Auschwitz, they kind of put so there were people who were able to survive Auschwitz, and not many, but there were people. Anyway, so the march is actually a physical march from Auschwitz to Birkenau to kind of say, like, we're still here. It's a march of survivors, and you go with a survivor because the idea of it is, there's very few survivors left. It's like the last generation is pretty much dying out. But the idea is that if you go to Auschwitz with a survivor, you become the next survivor. So you literally go with somebody who, like, I went with this guy, Sam, who was a Holocaust survivor, and he physically was like, I was in that barrack. Like, I remember standing in this very spot, and this is where my parents and I were separated. And this is, that was the last time I saw my dad. It's incredible stuff. There's no way that if you do that, it doesn't stay with you. So the idea basically is you become this kind of next generation of survivor. So I found out, again, sorry, so I just wanted to give you background on the trip. So then I go on this trip in college. 10 years later, fast forward, I find out that it's the 25th anniversary. And not only are they going with survivors and students, which is the normal March of the Living, but they're also bringing World War II veterans for the first time to go back and kind of it wasn't really Americans who liberated Auschwitz, but some Americans liberated some of the other concentration camps. So they were bringing for the first time these liberators. And it was something that I heard about, and I was like, I have to go on this trip. I have to. So I pitched it to my boss. And I found all of these Long Island students who were going, a survivor from Long Island and a liberator from Long Island who was going. And I basically followed them and shadowed them. I spoke to them before. We followed them during the trip and then spoke to them after about how it influenced them. And that was the documentary and the series that I created.
I think it's so important. History is like America's worst subject, right? Like, we just, and seriously, like, people they don't know their history. And I think, it's really awesome that you had the opportunity to go see firsthand, to experience history firsthand, right? In a very like 3D, like type of way. Well, like I said before. Anyway, one of the things that I think would be really helpful for people in the Black community to do is to understand the history. Legislation, like you said, has real consequences. There's this awesome book. It's called 400 Souls, if I'm not mistaken. It's by Ibram Kendi. And I believe the other author is Keisha Blaine or Keisha Blair, I forget. But Ibram did How to Be Anti-Racist. That was a very popular, like, New York Times selling book. And when you read this book, it's awesome because it covers 400 years, right, of history of Black Americans. And it starts out, well, it didn't start out, but near the beginning, they talk about the legislation, right? How basically racism was codified. And it's really, really important for Americans to understand that part of history, is that slowly there were, there were biases that were put into law. And it said, okay, you know what? Slaves who were born to mothers, of like Christian women weren't slaves. And then at some point, somebody in the church was like, yeah, no, but we really don't like Black people. And like, we really just want them to be slaves. So let's make a law that says, like, even if you're born, like to like a free mother, or if you're born to a Christian mother, you're still going to be a slave. So literally that with the stroke of a pen, every single Black person who was born to a slave was now a slave. It didn't, or you could be born to a free person and be a slave. Like, it didn't matter. Like, you were just a slave. If you were Black and you were born in America, you were a slave. And people need to understand that this stuff came from law. And if you understand that, then you'll look at the residue of that legislation over the course of our country's history, and you'll look at the laws today, and you'll start to see little glimpses of the past in those laws today and how they still have an impact on our community. Reading books like that, going to Ghana, and seeing the door of no return, on the coast, seeing where the slaves were held, the enslaved Africans were held and then put on the ships. Seeing these things, I think, will impact people in a visceral way and move them to action and the way that it moved you to action. The more you know, the more inclined you are to do something. So I really love that for you and your, life's journey. And I think that's something that everyone can kind of take away. Like go get informed, about the history.
Even not going back hundreds of years, but redlining and what that did to Black communities in terms of building up generational wealth or not being able to build up generational wealth. Right. We're still dealing with the repercussions of that now.
Right.
So I totally agree with you.
Right. And I'll say this last thing because I don't want to suck up all the oxygen, but, before Ken knows me, I use a lot of words. I'm very verbose. Before we started recording, we were talking about just humans, right? Like being humans, like we have guests on the show. They're like, who are not other Black men, we have Black females, white females, Latina, like, because at the end of the day, we're all just people. And, we all have, what was that thing that you said about we all want to pay taxes and
we all care about our kids. I mean, like what do you care about? You want your kids to live better than you lived. You want them to have opportunity. We're all like, most people want the same thing. And, the other thing is too, is like most people are good, right? And this is a problem with the media. And I will say this, and this is a problem with news, is bad stuff makes news, right? When everything goes right, that's not a story. It's the bad stuff that makes the news. And I think that really can distort our impression of humanity. I think we tend to have like bad images projected onto us all the time when most people are really good and law abiding and love their kids and want to do better and care about each other. So that's where what you guys were saying really resonates. It's like, there is the humanity, we're all, for the most part, we all kind of want the same stuff.
No, that's actually how we talk a lot on air. Everyone wants to see the train wreck, but there's definitely more good in this world. There really is, especially with people like Fenton over here.
The train wreck. I mean, I've wondered about that, but you don't have to wonder too long. Like why, a kitten, getting saved out of a tree or something like that doesn't make the news as often as all the negative stuff. But I won't dive too deep into that.
You don't want to make this, journalism. What's wrong with the media? 101.
Not going to do it. But what I would be interested to know is, like what you have going on next. That's part of that journey for you.
So I'm really proud, actually, of what I'm doing right now, which is I work with, as I mentioned, Moshe Wanunu. He was an executive producer at CBS when I was a Money Watch correspondent for CBS News. And during the pandemic, he started just curating. He had left CBS, and then he just started curating news on his Instagram feed because he felt that there was just this desire for people to know what's going on, like in a real way, without spin. You watch one network, it's like the end of the world. You watch another, it's like COVID doesn't exist. And I think that he really felt this. He really understood that people wanted just real information without spin. So he started curating the news on his Instagram feed, and it took off. And I think because he was giving people something that wasn't really out there. And then he and I talked. I love podcasting, despite the fact that most of my career has been on camera. I think that there's something really special about podcasting. I'm assuming you guys agree, given that you have a podcast. I feel like there's just something really intimate about it. And people who listen to you on a podcast feel like they really know you. And so he and I started working together, and we launched a daily podcast. So every day we basically break down the news. We try to have a lot of fun with it. We make it conversational, and we try not to make it like, the world is ending. We try to just like, these are the facts. We talk about it. We don't really give our opinion because we try to be pretty nonpartisan. And again, like I said, we have a lot of fun with it. So I'm really excited about that. We do a newsletter as well, where we break down one story in depth every day, and then link to some other articles and things that are going on. So that's kind of where I am right now. And I'm pretty excited about it.
That's amazing. I'm a proponent of being informed about what's going in the world, but I don't let it raise my blood pressure. I kind of detach myself emotionally from it, but I like to be informed. And I guess I'm curious, from a journalist, what are ways that you think people can engage with the world around them, be informed with developments and things like that, but not, jump off the cliff and out the window every time something seems like it might be, sensationally negative,
Or like the sky is falling.
Yeah, because there's a lot of information out there, but sometimes it does have a spin, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I think it's important to find people that you trust, to give that, sources that you trust, that you feel are giving you the real story. I also think, though, it's important to sometimes listen and follow people who may not tell you what you want to hear, who kind of challenge your worldview a little bit, because the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. So I think that's my best advice, is to just, I'd say, follow as many people as you can, find sources that you trust, and realize, we're going to be okay. It's not all bad.
I love that.
Yeah. Right.
Ken, you had a thought?
I did have a thought. It was, so what kind of advice would you give someone who wanted to get into journalism about being authentic, which is happening more, I feel, with this new generation coming up? They're being more authentic when it comes to their policies, their beliefs, and just kind of stepping away from the traditional, whatever I hear, I'm just going to regurgitate. So what kind of advice would you give to someone who's looking to be a journalist, and, how to stay on that path of just being real with their audience?
It's a great question. I mean, you ultimately, you can't fool people forever. So, you kind of have to be yourself, because eventually it's going to come through. But I do think, what scares me a little bit about a newer generation of journalists is maybe sometimes like not necessarily being objective, because I guess like I'm an old school kind of person, and I do feel like there really is still a place for just facts. There are still facts out there. And so I guess my advice for people who are coming up would be, do the work. You got to work really hard if you want to be successful at anything. It takes time. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's okay. That's how you learn. I've learned more from getting stories wrong and being held accountable for them than I have from just all the stuff that I got right. And I'd say try to find, people who talk to people who you disagree with and hear them out. And, you might find that there's stuff that you do agree on. Just try to, I think, talk to people of differing opinions.
Yeah, I'm big on that. I was watching a video the other day, and it had something to do with it was affirmative action. And there was a gentleman, and it was an African American, who was speaking about affirmative action being harmful to members of the Black community. And, that for many would be a hot take, right? Coming from a Black person. And I found myself like, I had like a visceral response. Like I wanted to stop the video, like at certain points and be like, no, like this is just real. This isn't right. What he's saying can't be, no. But I listened to it and I said, man, this guy's argument is really good. Listen, I respect anyone who can like put together a well-crafted argument. Okay. I think that's really important. I think discourse is really important. It's when we walk away from the table that we really start to have issues. World leaders who like are at war with one another still talk, right? Like they've got their back channels and they're trying to like figure out how to cease fire and stuff like that. Like people never stop talking, even at the highest levels in our world's leadership. But we will just like, I'm not talking to Uncle Danny at Thanksgiving because,
Right.
you know, he likes this person or whatever the case is. So anyway, he had a really well-crafted argument, and I actually brought it to my wife. And I was like, hey, you should check this out. Like, here are his points. And I thought it was really well laid out. And what we found, because my wife and I, you know, talk about stuff all the time. It's one of the reasons why we're married is we love, you know, talking to each other. Nuance is everything. You know, everything is multifaceted. Everything is nuanced. And, you know, when you start talking to people and you stay in it, you'll find that there's so many shades of gray. You can't just paint things black and white. And it takes time, though, and it takes effort. You know, and it can get intense or it can be awkward. So, you know, to your point, like, do the work. You know, stay in it. Talk to people who have different opinions. Listen to things that make you say, oh, no, I don't like that. I don't agree with that. But sit with it, you know, because you might actually come away with something that you can, it might be helpful for you. It might be useful for you, you know?
I think also that's the pro and con, or the negative and positive of social media, is that, look, tweets are by nature these really short things that you write, you know, reels, and everything's all about, you know, getting your point across in 30 seconds or less, just say. That's not a lot of time. You know, most of these topics are really, really complicated. So I think that just our shortened attention span does not really lend itself to fully understanding issues that are really complex. To your point, right? Imagine you only were able to watch like 25 seconds of that video on affirmative action. You probably would have just stayed thinking, hey, this is insane or whatever. But you watch the whole thing and we're like, oh, you know, there might be some points here. And that's kind of, I think, the problem right now in a lot of ways. I will say but on the other side of it, the cool thing about social media is that you can connect with people that you may not have ever had the opportunity to otherwise. And we have, for our platform for news, we have a very big social media following. And so we post news stories, and with 50 to 100 people respond really quickly who are directly impacted by it, or who are adding just expertise or perspective that we wouldn't have had a chance to get in traditional media, where you're just like on TV and maybe somebody writes into a station or calls into the station. With social media, you could post a story and get really, really thoughtful, tons of responses. So I think that's one of the positives of it, is that, you know, you're able to talk to people who may have a differing view, or just offer real insight into a story that you never would have gotten.
Yeah, it's so true. I listen to a ton of NPR, and Brian Lehrer. I love when it's like they'll have a topic and they'll get, you know, 4 or 5 people on there, and like 3 of them will be people who are like for this thing, and they'll have like one person that's against. I was like, I really would have liked to hear some other people, you know, who are against this thing or whatever, but there's only so much time, right? Because it's traditional media. So social media does allow, like, for a lot of discourse, it can get super messy. Like, I try to stay out of the comments because unless I have a bag of popcorn.
Comment section, I have like lost years of my life reading the comment section on stories.
Oh my God. Do you at least get a laugh? You have to laugh about it sometimes.
Sometimes I find myself like scrolling through these comments, and I'm just like, Jill, put down the phone. But I do think it's important to gauge. I don't know. I like to see where people are, you know, in some cases, like, so unhinged writing.
Those are the best. Oh, those are the best.
But
I love it.
You do get a pulse. You do get a pulse of where people are going. I'm sorry, Ken, what were you saying? I
said that's when you get your tea and put your pinky up. Those unhinged people. Oh, those are my favorite.
I gotta be honest. Sometimes I find that I scroll down to the comments before I've even like watched the full video or read the whole post. I'm like, no, let me just see what people are saying about this and dive into the comments. And you know, these social media companies are intelligent. They understand psychology very well and behavioral, you know, science and all that stuff. So they know that we read the comments. You know, like we do have visceral responses. We read somebody's comment and we're like, oh no, I didn't say something about that. Do you know how many times I've like gone to my phone and like read a comment and been like, I'm going to respond to that. And then it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Put the phone down, Karen.
You don't know this person. Here's what I'll say. I think every time we have a thought to respond to someone on social media, put the phone down and go have a conversation with somebody in real life that's actually in your community. It's actually in your circle that you can really touch and impact with that discourse. And that's, how we make change, right? It's like one conversation at a time, with people, who actually know, like, and trust us. Or maybe they don't like you, but whatever.
Yeah.
So my daughter had a ton of food allergies, like really, really serious life-threatening food allergies. And we wound up doing this homeopathic treatment for her, and she's in a much better place right now. But this kind of became my thing. I mean, it's totally life altering when you can't freely just eat food. And especially for my, with young kids is like, they don't know. So they're just eating everything. And so I was basically petrified anytime she would eat, and especially if we left the house. We never ate at restaurants or anything like that. So I was like hypersensitive to anything related to food allergies. And I would sometimes be on social media, and we say like food allergies are this one area where it's still like okay to make fun of people who have food allergies. And you would go onto social media and certain people would complain about, not being allowed to have peanuts on the flight and make the crudest comments. And my blood would boil. And I would like, it's the one thing where I would just write back kind of like in the heat of the moment, like, wait till you have a kid with food allergies, like going nuts. And then sometimes I would really dial it back. And I wound up getting into some conversations with people. Like I would write, I would kind of try to write something somewhat, polite, but, in response to them just saying like, hey, like this is a real thing. People could actually die or have to go to the hospital because of food allergies, because they eat something that, isn't safe for them. And what I found though, is that if I wasn't totally just kind of like being a bitch, and trying to give them a dig back and actually explained it in a kind of a thoughtful way, you'd sometimes get into a conversation where somebody would respond and be like, you know what, I didn't even realize that, and I'm sorry. And I think that I learned a lot because I was like raw and emotional as a mom trying to protect my kid and dealing with this. And so anybody who would write something, I would just like pounce. And then when I stepped back a little bit and I kind of took a deep breath, and I would respond in a way that was, again, a little bit more thoughtful, I found that was when conversations actually happened. And I hope I changed a couple of minds, through that, as opposed to just being totally snarky and like, writing a rude comment back.
Yeah, well, the snarkiness.
It's no joke. I was about to say it's our daughter has severe. She's actually doing the shots right now.
Oh, what is she allergic to?
Everything. Soy, shellfish.
So you get, I
you
feel
can think
you.
of. No, like it's crazy. Like to the point we had to be careful what restaurants we went to, because she would have an outbreak. We were at a seafood restaurant when she was like 8 years old, and she started getting an outbreak. Like, what's going on? Later on, we found out she was literally allergic to everything. Where she has to carry an EpiPen. There's one at school. There's one for the track coach. There's one at home. There's one in her book bag. It's
It's a hard life. It's hard.
Even like the snack, there's soy and everything. I'm not trying to get off course right now, but yeah, it hits home. It hits home.
It sounds.
So you get that, right? So like I would be on social media and somebody would be making an obnoxious, idiotic comment, and I'd be like, like a lunatic back. And then I'd have to be like, all right, Jill, dial it down. And then, back to what we were saying, like you're able to actually have real conversations. I think, and I don't know if you were like this, like I didn't have food allergies when we were growing up. No one really had food allergies. And so I had to educate myself on all of this within the past few years. And I'm sure you did too. And so I think unless somebody is dealing with it with a family member that or a loved one that has food allergies, they probably just don't get it. Like, it's not out of being mean. They probably just don't really understand how serious it is.
Like reading ingredients on a bag of chips.
Oh, yeah. it's rough. I know.
But I think that's the difference, right? Is like when you're educated, you don't probably don't have a tendency to respond in an emotional way. It's like, I can respond to you with information. This is an opportunity for me to educate you. And I think that conversations that like devolve, into chaos and violence, digital violence on the internet, it stems from a lack of information. When you put two people who are well versed on a topic together, they may have opposing views, but they can have a civil discourse about something. And I think social media really just kind of represents how ill-informed, our, society is on a myriad of topics, basically everything, because it doesn't matter what page the comment section's in that you look at, like everybody's arguing. And I think it would really be helpful for people to just get really informed about those causes and topics that are near and dear to their hearts, and then go and inform others. That's my take.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Like Joe was saying before, like you were saying, social media is a good and bad vice. You can learn from it. At the same time, there is a lot of nonsense just on there of people stating opinions instead of fact.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
It definitely made the world a lot smaller, that you can actually learn new things too.
Yeah, so you guys do a lot of stuff with mental health. And I will say, as I really struggled when I became a mom. Like, it just didn't come naturally to me at all. I felt like in the postpartum phase, especially, I had my first daughter. I have one daughter. So I had my daughter when I was 37, 38. So I was really into my career, and I got married later in my life. And so my husband and I, we had a baby, and it was totally like a shock to the system. And I don't think that you're kind of prepared for it. Like, I just didn't really know what to expect at all. And I definitely had a little bit of postpartum depression, which is something that is not openly spoken about as much as it should be. And I found that social media also was like a blessing and a curse. And I had a couple of friends who had babies maybe a month or two before I did. And I would look at like their posts on Instagram, which was like, oh, they're perfect babies, and they looked so well rested. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, what am I doing wrong? I mean, why am I having such a hard time with this? And I think that's hard too. I think there's a lot of judgment as well on social media, especially, and I don't know if you guys follow any parenting accounts. I'm sure, yes. I don't know why you're like mother. I follow a lot of like mom accounts too. And I think there's a lot of just judgment in the parenting zone. Wait, what?
We both definitely follow those accounts.
Lots of mom accounts.
We do follow mom accounts. You learn a lot, man. Yo, listen, am I supposed to be saying? My wife went through postpartum. We went through miscarriage. People don't talk about miscarriage. We had 2 miscarriages also. So we have a rainbow baby, but people need to talk about it a little more often. It's 2 subjects that I guess people are, number one, misinformed about, and number 2, I guess, just worried about judgment. That yes, it does happen. Postpartum depression does happen, and miscarriages do happen, but people want to sweep it under the rug because it's not the rainbow and sunshine, and it's not healthy. And there's more accounts out there now, like you were just saying, mom accounts, even father, like dad accounts, because we go through it also as being the significant other, husband, boy, whatever it may be. The men are going through it also. So we try to find that solitude. We try to find that community of people that we can relate to that are going through it as well. Because, like you just said, no one wants to talk about it. And we have to. I think it'll bring people closer. It gets your mind, stirring to say, it's okay. It's okay what you're feeling. It's okay what you're going through. There is no kind of normalcy. Normal's whatever you create. So
yeah, and those people are lying too. All right. Just like, they got the influencers who like Photoshop their bodies and they're lying to you.
Oh God, yeah.
Mommy and daddy accounts are lying too. They're not getting sleep. Their life isn't that sweet. If you've ever had a child before, you know this. It's rough. It's horrible. No one looks like good when you're like, it could be 2:00 in the afternoon and you're like, I haven't showered yet. Like I stink. The place is a mess. And it's just like your life is falling apart and you're trying to keep it all together. And then you're going to go on like Instagram and be like, everything's perfect. Like, no.
I got a haircut today and like got a shave for this. Otherwise, this has been all scruffy. It was bad.
My pet peeve actually, though, with Instagram and like the mom accounts is dad shaming. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen any posts like that.
Yes.
But I'm very lucky in that I'm married to a great dad. My husband is such a good dad and he's so hands-on. And I think culturally there's sort of this thing where you have these moms who just sort of shame their husbands for what they think is funny, I guess. Like I saw this account once where this mom, she was in the hospital bed where she had just delivered. And she kind of like panned over. She's like, here I am, just, 10 hours of labor and blah, blah, blah. And then pans over and her husband was sleeping on the couch, I guess, in the hospital room. And, a lot of people wrote in like, men, kind of like making fun of them. And then I was happy to see in the comments that there were a lot of people who were like, why are you dad shaming? Like, why are you shaming him? He was probably up with you the whole night. Like, is he not allowed to sleep? What is he supposed to be doing? You're in the hospital. And I think that's sort of become one of my pet peeves with some of the accounts. And I don't know, as fathers, like if you guys ever feel that, where it's like, these stereotypes that the mom does everything and the dad just kind of, comes along or whatever. I find that to be so frustrating because I think it's perpetuating the stereotype as opposed to trying to change it.
Yeah, I was at dinner the other night and with a group of friends, and the conversation came up. Being in labor, one of the mothers there was in labor, she remembers, and she wasn't in labor at dinner. She recounted being in labor and her husband was sleeping like while she was pushing, right? And again, it's a snapshot in time. She's like, oh my God, like he's asleep. I'm pushing out his baby. And somebody else came to his defense like, yeah, but that day he had done all of this stuff. And the day before, he'd only gotten like an hour or two of sleep, all things, taking care of his kids in preparation for, the new baby coming. And yeah, he was tired and he fell asleep in the delivery room because he's probably the first time he got a chance to sit down, and we kind of went around the table, because we're all, married with kids, and we kind of went around the table and shared our stories and everything. And it was really refreshing to hear even some of the wives, comment like, but he does so much and so forth and so on. I work at home. I have since like 2017. And so I have the pleasure and the blessing of having been very, very present for like everything. Like I don't miss a thing. Actually, my wife goes to work. I'm home. I, pick up our daughter and all these things. And so when I see those type of comments, I am, it bothers me a bit, because I'm like, I'm here. I'm super here. And it's specifically as a Black father, I think like statistically, like Black men are more likely to be engaged, like I forget how they, calculate the index or whatever, but more likely to be engaged with their kids than, men from other communities. And I live in a mostly white, homogenous community, affluent community. And I walk around and sometimes I feel like I'm like, they must think I'm the nanny or something. I was like, no, I'm her dad. Like I'm here at the park. So yeah, I was basically speaking about, kind of appearing to be like the nanny, like walking around with my daughter. But no, it's I think it's really great, to see men in the household. I think the pandemic has definitely aided with that. I kind of always tend to bring things back into like the Black perspective because this is a show with two Black guys talking about Black mental health. So it's kind of my job. But being if you have resources, like sometimes, there is an unequal distribution of resources. And when you have resources, the pandemic in some ways was like kind of a blessing for some families, right? Like my wife was home, I was home, it was all good. I like my wife. We had a great time. We like our daughter, and, we had a wonderful time together, and we're able to, keep going. With some people, they weren't able to be in the house. They had to still go to work, putting themselves in danger, at risk of, getting their family sick and things like that. So for me, I would say, yeah, it was good to be able to have that time with my child, and, show people that, Black dads are a real thing. I hate that hashtag, but whatever. I'm going to hashtag it because, it'll get some views on this sucker. Anyway.
All right. Let's wrap this up, Jill. Anything coming on the horizon with you? And after that, please explain to the audience where they can find you online on social media.
Well, first of all, you guys, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope I didn't let you down as a guest here.
No, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so you could find me. I'm on Instagram, Jill R. Wagner. I don't really do Twitter anymore. I just it's
Nobody
too crazy
does.
for me out there. I don't think I can emotionally and mentally handle it. So I'm on Instagram. And then if you like podcasts, which obviously you do because you're listening to this, and you want just kind of straight news, just the facts, a little bit of fun, it's called the Mo News Podcast, MONEWS podcast, 2 words, Mo space news. And we're basically anywhere you listen to a podcast. So check us out. I'd really appreciate it. I'm curious. I hope you guys check it out too for getting some news. And I always like feedback, good or bad.
Absolutely.
You could be like, Jill, that was so stupid. I don't even know.
We'll be in the comment section lighting it up.
No, I always tell my parents, I'm like, guys, they listen to everything I do and every report I've ever done. And they're always just like, you're amazing. You're the best. You're so smart. This was perfect. And I'm like, I appreciate it, but that's not helpful. Can you give me something constructive that I can use?
Yes, my mom watches and she loves it. And I just, I like to know what people think maybe we could improve upon and things like that. So that being said, leave it in the comment section if you're thinking something that we could do better. Make sure you check out Jill. We'll put all of her links in the description so you can check her out. And Jill, thank you again so much for being here on Products of Circumstance. And that's it. We'll see you all next week.
All right, Fenton, Ken, thank you guys.
Pleasure.